The Cave of Altamira in northern Spain holds its breath in the dark, waiting for the light to brush its secrets once more. It was here, in the late summer of 1879, that a young girl's lamp caught something that should have been impossible. Her name was Maria, and she walked where grown men feared to tread, beneath a ceiling swollen with shadow. As the flame flickered upward, she looked at the stone and saw a great herd of bison staring back. They were painted in ochre, charcoal, and rust, their bodies swelling from the rock as if they had always lived inside it. Her father, Marcelino Sanz de Sautuola, had been digging for old bones, but she had uncovered a silent bestiary. What their lamp revealed that day would crack the foundations of what we believed about our own ancestors. The ceiling rolls in gentle waves, and upon those ripples, the artists placed their creatures with breathtaking intelligence. Every shoulder of bison swells along a natural bulge in the rock. Every curled hoof follows a fissure. Polychrome bodies leap from the limestone, alive with shadow and motion, breathing a life that seems to defy deep time. We tell ourselves that history is a solved puzzle until you stand in this silence and realize the piece you hold does not fit. The art was too advanced, too anatomically precise, too emotionally present to belong to the Ice Age. And so the academic world, in its certainty, chose to bury the truth back under the earth. The initial discovery of Altamira's paintings was met not with awe, but with sharp, defensive derision. Leading prehistorians of the late 19th century, guardians of a rigid evolutionary ladder, could not accept what they saw. French scholar Émile Cartailhac refused even to visit the cave before condemning the paintings as a crude hoax. At the Congress of Prehistoric Anthropology in Lisbon in 1880, Sautuola's claims were laughed out of the hall. The whispers spread that a Jesuit priest or a local painter must have forged the bison under Sautuola's secret instruction. Sautuola, a quiet amateur archaeologist, carried his daughter's wonder into a storm of scholarly scorn. He published a careful monograph filled with sketches and evidence, but the doors of science slammed shut in his face. The ink of his report was barely dry before the accusations of fraud coated his reputation in permanent frost. Within the stone of the cave, the bison remained suspended in their eternal stampede, oblivious to the human drama. What makes Altamira's art so disquieting is not its age alone, but the sheer mastery of its creator. The ceiling functions as a unified composition, a proto-cinematic panorama that recedes into the porous limestone. Artists used charcoal made from burnt bone and ochre, mixed with animal fat, blowing pigment through hollow bones to create soft, mist-like shading. One dominant queen of the herd is an enormous bison, her body over 6 feet long, poised like a cloud about to thunder. Her eye, a simple curve of charcoal, holds a direct, unnerving stillness that bridges 36,000 years. Surrounding her are boars, deer, and horses, each rendered with a naturalism that Renaissance masters might envy. Yet this art was not made for museums or fame, but for a ritual world wrapped in eternal darkness. The artists worked deep inside the mountain, in places where the sun never reaches, guided only by marrow lamps. Their hands transformed the rock's topography into living forces, as if the stone itself had always dreamed of becoming animal. Some researchers theorize that this was an act of creation in reverse, releasing spirits from the earth. This is the evidence that should not exist, a voice from the Ice Age that speaks in a language more fluent than we imagined. When European archaeologists began discovering similar painted caves, like Fond de Gaume and Le Combarel, the tide turned. Cartailhac, to his credit, eventually entered the dark and let his skepticism dissolve in the lamplight. In 1902, he published a famous paper titled Mea culpa d'un sceptique, confessing his error and restoring Altamira's place in history. But this vindication arrived 23 years too late for Marcelino Sanz de Sautuola, who had died in 1888, a broken, disgraced man. Where archaeology faltered, local legend began to fill the silence with whispers of lost sorcerers and animal gods. The labyrinth of theories about Altamira's purpose only deepens the shadow veiling its true meaning. Mainstream archaeology frames these painted chambers as sites of hunting magic or shamanic initiation. The idea is that by depicting the bison pierced by spears or by merging with the beast in trance, the hunters gained power over their prey. But not a single animal on the Altamira ceiling is pierced by a weapon, and the vast majority seem serene beyond violence. Another persistent idea suggests the paintings are simply art for its own sake, humanity's first eruption of pure aesthetic expression. The problem with that comfortable notion is the remote, claustrophobic location so far from the light of the living world. A darker hypothesis suggests the cave functioned as an acoustic temple, a place where echoes were mistaken for the voices of spirits. Recordings inside the chambers reveal that certain painted zones align with extraordinary resonant frequencies, sharpening the sense that the stone itself is singing. One could argue the cavern is a memory palace, an archive of a lost cosmology encoded in pigment and shadow. Yet for every theory that promises clarity, the ancient animal stare offers only a deeper, more profound silence. The boundary between hard evidence and desperate speculation becomes as thin as the lamplight trembling on the wall. The very concept of prehistory was a young science in the 1880s, barely out of its own cradle, and Altamira nearly broke it. To accept those paintings as authentic meant rewriting the entire story of human consciousnesses and cognitive evolution. It meant admitting that the human hand was capable of transcendent beauty long before the first cities clawed at the sky. It forced Victorian minds to stare into the abyss of deep time and see a version of themselves they were not prepared to recognize. The bison on the ceiling are not mere decorations. They are emissaries from an era where myth and survival breathed the same air. You can feel the obsessive patience of the artist in every delicate application of charcoal, a tenderness that freezes the heart. What massive, unseen engine of belief drove a person to crawl through narrow passages and paint in utter darkness? Was it fear, ecstasy, duty, or the simple, terrifying need to leave a mark on an indifferent universe? We look at the herds on the ceiling and try to decode their language, but perhaps we are only listening to echoes of a dream. The human element of Altamira is as fragile as a soot-blackened fingernail left on the stone floor. Consider Maria, the girl who spotted the bison first, a child too young to know that her eyes were tearing down the walls of accepted time. She witnessed the birth of a new mystery, and her father, in his doomed obsession, became its first sacrificial keeper. Sautuola's lonely struggle is a mirror to every thinker who ever glimpsed a truth too vast for their era to hold. He wandered the cave with candles, taking meticulous notes while the rest of the world called him a forger. The stone indifference of the bison must have felt like a silent judgment, a tribe of painted witnesses that could not speak in his defense. History is littered with the bones of those who died before their vindication, and Altamira's discoverer rests among them. His grave cannot know that the cave he loved was later called the Sistine Chapel of Paleolithic art. The cavern is now sealed to tourists, its fragile pigment twitching under the threat of modern breath and light. A replica museum stands above ground, a mirror world where the bison are perfect copies but carry none of the original dust. Visitors walk through the airtight reconstruction and capture photographs, yet they will never feel the true weight of the stone above their skulls. The human obsession with Altamira has not waned. It has simply grown quieter, more philosophical. Artists stand in that replica chamber and weep, not for the paint, but for the unreachable human who stood in the dark and created meaning. The silence of the real cave, now preserved in climatic isolation, deepens year by year into a wholly hibernating state. Perhaps the bison are sleeping now, after their long journey through the centuries of human judgment. What persists is the echo of a question that archaeology cannot fully answer. What does it mean to be fully human? For so long, we defined humanity by our tools and our dominion. Yet here is proof that our first great achievement was a work of profound, intimate vision. The art of Altamira suggests that the imagination was not a luxury that developed late, but the furnace that forged everything else. It is an inheritance written in deer fat and charcoal, passed down through countless generations to a cave in Cantabria. Some nights, if you listen to the wind moving through the hills above the cave, you might imagine it carries the scent of marrow fat burning in a stone lamp. The boundary between the observer and the observed blurs in that deep velvet darkness. We stare at the bison, and the bison stare back across an abyss of time that should have erased all memory. And yet the memory clings, stubborn as lichen on bone, reminding us that we will never truly know the minds that first shaped this world. The human family tree is full of dead branches, but Altamira feels like a shared beating heart buried under the soil. As you exit the metaphor of the cave and return to the surface, the sunlight feels almost accusatory, too loud for such ancient whispers. The enduring enigma is not the age of the art, but the intensity of the spirit that it still radiates. We are no closer to knowing the name of the shaman or the ritual that summoned these animals from the rock. The stone keeps its vow of silence, a faithful guardian of a secret that was never meant to survive into our world. Time has no obligation to reveal all things. Sometimes it simply seals the tomb and swallows the key. Altamira stands as a monument to human genius and human limitation, both carved by the same trembling hand. The cave whispers that history is not a straight ascent from darkness to light, but a landscape full of lost peaks and sunken palaces. What other marvels lie buried in limestone sleep, waiting for a child's lamp or a flood to crack them open? Each bison on the ceiling is a question mark, drawn with the breath of a vanished mouth. The mystery will endure because the artists left no written creed, only a frozen dance in the throat of a mountain. And perhaps that is the deepest lesson the cave offers, that some truths can only be painted, never spoken. In the end, the art that should not exist exists, and its very existence makes the world wilder and less knowable. The darkness of Altamira is not an absence. It is a thick, nourishing substance from which herds of wonder can still be born. So we carry the bison with us into the upper air, their charcoal eyes imprinted on our modern, restless minds. And we remember, with a shiver that has nothing to do with cold, that the most profound chambers of human memory still sleep in the dark, dreaming.